You know we're in the end game now, especially when it comes to comics, when you start hearing rumors about the potentiality of Marvel and DC merging. It's a big story. There's a lot there to talk about, and we're going to dive into that right now. Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is Three Buck Theater, and there's been some interesting news brewing over the course of the past 24 hours about the potentiality of Marvel licensing the characters from DC Comics, or in some cases, outright buying DC Comics. Now, I don't know how much of this is real. I don't know how much of this is fake or how much of this is just pure speculation. But as I've seen some people talk about this story now in regards to other elements going on between not only Marvel Comics but DC Comics, there does appear to be maybe a little bit of smoke, and that smoke oftentimes gets blown up to be this massive brush fire, which some people are running with at the moment. So here's what we know so far. First off, you have a couple different comics from both DC and Marvel that are kind of pseudo referencing each other. Now, we know that DC is working on the new 5G event, or the Generation 5. I talked about that the other day, that it's kind of rumored to be a last ditch effort from DC Comics in order to spur interest, reset the timeline once again, because it's just what they do, and then hopefully get a renewed interest in new characters or new versions of these characters in hopes of maybe finding a way to save the company, at least in the eyes of AT&T, who after the massive purchase of Time Warner probably looks at DC Comics as maybe a bit of a liability, just not the most performing part of the company. They know the TV side does well with the Arrowverse and what's going to be going to HBO Max. There is DC Universe, which that's in some serious flux right now. By the way, if you haven't seen the Harley Quinn show, watch the Harley Quinn show. It's so good. However, in the Doomsday Clock comic, there's a reference from Dr. Manhattan about potential Marvel. Right now, they say that Superman is going to be battling Thor in 2030, and that a green behemoth that is stronger than Doomsday is also going to show up. Now, this could be a whole bunch of different things, but it does feel like it is a subtle reference to Marvel, especially with Thor. And then the Thor comic run that's on right now, I believe it's in issue number 2, there is this kind of out of the blue reference of a sun god and a dark god and a speed god and a god of the ocean and an emerald god, a league of gods that protect the world. Now, some are believing that these two instances are referring to a crossover event, right? Something like a Secret Crisis. And we know that DC loves to use the term crisis, and we know that Marvel loves to use the term secret. So it kind of feels like the two might be crossing over in some major event. And it's been something that I think even Kevin Feige or someone has talked about in the past as like an offhand comment, how they like to see it happen. But there's a lot of people thinking that this is now kind of where things are going to go. Now, the other rumor here is that apparently AT&T is just looking to dump the comic book line, right? They're just looking to dump DC Comics, and people are assuming that this means that Marvel Publishing is going to come in and just license it or outright buy it. I don't see that happening, if I'm being honest with you, right? And the reason why is because ultimately it boils down to a couple key factors. One, Disney would want to outright buy it. Okay, but AT&T still wants to make money off of the television and film and animated and video game rights, okay, and all the merch. So there'd be a rights sharing situation there, and Disney doesn't want to do that. I think at this point, we know that, right? To give you guys just the best example I can think of, back in the late 90s when Marvel Comics was in some seriously bad shape, they sold the film rights to Sony for Spider-Man. And then when Sony was in a bad shape back in 2014, they actually traded the merchandising for Spider-Man to Marvel in order to get their hands on the film licensing fee. Because even though they have the rights to produce it, they don't outright own the characters, and they still have to pay Marvel, or had to pay Marvel, or Disney really, a licensing fee in order to make the movie, and the two just kind of traded. Now, Disney made a lot more money off of the merchandise of Spider-Man than they would have made off of that particular licensing fee, but Sony was so hard up for cash that they made the deal work. And then we find ourselves in a situation where Sony's also having a bad run with their other properties, and so they need Spider-Man to be successful. So they are working with Disney on that one right there. But we know that the eventual end game for that is that Disney will ultimately end up getting the rights back to Spider-Man when Sony inevitably sells, because it's going to happen. Anyway, back to DC. They're in a similar situation with AT&T. AT&T is putting a lot of time and energy into the HBO Max service with a lot of Greg Berlanti shows. Never mind the $250 million deal for J.J. Abrams to come over and develop content exclusively for Warner's and HBO Max, and the rumored story that he's going to be taking over Justice League Dark. So they're not going to want to separate that. And Disney is not going to want to sit there and have both. They're not going to want to sit there and play the rights game anymore. They already know what it leads to in regards to Sony and Spider-Man. Why would they want to do that with why would they want to do that with this? Why would they want to do that with DC? So here's why I think this story is making its way out there. I think it's AT&T pushing the narrative, right? I think it's AT&T pushing the theory that they could sell in order to drive its prices up or its sales up. Okay, we've seen this before, right, with certain companies and making those kind of announcements, or a rumor coming out and it either tanking the stock price or inflating the stock price because people are trying to get in before it's too late. There's that whole fear of missing out element at play here. And I'm wondering if this kind of story is going to be enough, or it's being presented in a way to where fans of DC, because, you know, there's that DC Marvel divide, fans of DC are going to basically kind of like stick to their guns and back their team, and they're going to then spend the money on buying the comic books. Now, if the next month or so we start to notice an increase in book sales, right, then I think my theory is sound, because it would only make the most amount of sense. AT&T has everything to gain off of this story being as big as it is, right? I was watching a YouTube channel today with nearly 2 million subs, I think Valiant something or another, that they were talking about it. They're talking about it on a channel with nearly 2 million subscribers, and they're out there acting like it could be realistic, like it could be real. And at no point are they giving it any thought to the angle that I'm putting it on, because I always like to think of business first. What is the best course of business? And if you look at everything with Disney and Spider-Man and its rights with Sony, you know they don't want to go through that kerfuffle again. AT&T would be dumb to give up DC Entertainment or DC Comics or DC Publishing, because then it would be a rights fiasco between everything. It just would be a rights fiasco. Eventually, whoever buys the rights, if it's Disney, would want more of a piece of the pie. They would sit there and go, well, we're publishing the comics, and the comics have been declining anyway for years. We know this. But they would go, oh, well, we are now wanting merch, and we're now wanting part of the box office. And how about this? We'll start co-producing the movies with you, because they know that's where the money is. So they're stupid to license out these characters unless they come in and they outright buy it. But they're not going to sit there and spend how much money DC Comics is worth to buy it. It doesn't make any sense to them. And especially in regards to Kevin Feige. Feige currently runs Marvel Studios, Marvel Television, Marvel Publishing, kind of like Marvel Entertainment as a whole. And he is going to be working on Spider-Man, and he's working on Star Wars. I mean, how much more do you really want to kind of like pile on to this guy? And I'm not to say that he wouldn't do it, not to say that it wouldn't be interesting, but I don't think this is really where things are. Nothing about this makes sense from a business perspective, unless you look at it from AT&T trying to put fear out there, fear of loss of DC, in order to mobilize the base to get them to come and support their team. But look, at this point in time, any scenario is possible. We kind of live in this infinite scenario where anything could be real, anything could be fake, and none of us actually know what's going on or actually have the answers. You do have people like Ethan Van Sciver, who does have connections to DC, and did say the other day that if the 5G event fails, then they're going to be basically shutting down DC Comics. And that does seem more accurate, concerning the fact that, like I said, comic sales have been declining for quite some time. And if that's the case, I don't think it's going to be Marvel that comes in and buys them. But because of the film and television and games and merch rights, AT&T is just going to take the loss on comics and put all of their energy into promoting those other characters in a much more profitable medium. And that at the end of the day, that's the only thing that makes sense. Nothing else makes sense, right? Nothing else makes sense. Now there might be a crossover event as maybe a gimme, right? If Feige wants to work with DC for a crossover event, that could be something. That could be a thing. But when it comes to this rumor about DC being sold to Marvel or them merging or whatever, that would just all it does is benefit DC at the end of the day, or benefit AT&T. That's it. Anyway, I look forward to your thoughts. I look forward to your opinions. Please let me know down in the comments. This should be an interesting one. I will talk to you all later. Have yourself a great day. Please consider subscribing and liking the video, smacking on that notification bell, and maybe becoming a patron. Why not? Help the channel out. Help it grow. Help me cover more of the comic book drama without being completely full of drama myself. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day, and peace out.